So, I made a video about memes, which is kind of an innately ridiculous topic. Some people watching this will presumably see some merit in this, given that in many parts of the internet, on the far right as well as the far left, the power of meme magic, or just the idea that memes can spread an idea effectively, is taken as a given. For the rest of you, I want to make it clear that I don't think memes drive political discussions. I don't think they can fundamentally change anyone's views. But they can connect some dots for people. I think memes work like other mass media in the sense that they can take an idea that many people are on the verge of and through representation take them to the next step, or give them a framework or narrative to think about that idea. This process helped many people on the internet by their own account come to their political identities. At least that's what I told myself to get over how silly I feel making this. If you're not convinced, and I'm not even sure I am, I at least found this concept personally interesting, so maybe it doesn't have to have a purpose to be entertaining. Just know I'm cringing a little inside every time I say the word meme in a serious context. So, I know it's basically an internet faux pas to admit that a meme made you feel anything negative, but the "she's literally me" meme felt bad when I first started seeing it sometime in 2019. Specifically, this one made me kind of pause and go, is this about me? And that kind of got me thinking, where is that discomfort from? Is there anything to it? What does my reaction say about me? What does this thing say about the person who made it or the people who shared it? To put it simply, I guess it made me feel self-conscious. Like a lot of people, I definitely care too much what other people think of me, and even though I'm pretty sure no one in real life that I know or whose opinion I care about would relate something like this to me, and most of them would not even know how to begin to interpret it, there's still this vague sense of minor dread of, oh no, is that what I'm like? Am I cringe? And yeah, a bit. I mean, like every other gothy millennial woman, as a kid I really grew up liking and wanting to emulate cool goth girl characters from cartoons, but I'm also in my mid-20s now, and these days the only time I think about these characters is when some dude talks about wanting to date big titty goth GF Sam Manson fan art, or every bisexual woman collectively declares these characters her sapphic sexual awakening. So I'm gonna say pretty definitively that no, I don't think that any of these characters is literally me. But I also don't really think any real person would. I'm also aware that I'm not the only one feeling some kind of way about these memes. I used to sit in on and occasionally interact in a lot of Facebook groups which would feature memes like this pretty often, generally for the purpose of saying, hey, look at this terrible sexist meme. In fact, it's possible I first saw this meme in one of those groups. The responses were always predictable in these spaces because there was this immediate and somewhat understandable knee-jerk reaction to just say, this was made by some incel and anyone who shares it is one too, and dismiss it seemingly without another thought. Which, again, I get. I mean, I was in these groups to make fun of stuff like this too. But this is such a mild meme by the standards of these groups, and I think the reason it ended up there was less for its objectionable content and more because it caused a gut defensive reaction. If you really don't think something is worth taking seriously or even considering at all, you don't dedicate energy to explaining how much you don't care. People felt singled out by this. They felt like their self-expression or interests were being trivialized, like someone was saying, I can sum you up like this, and now I don't have to take you seriously. Memes like this are far from limited to focusing on any one demographic, and the formats I'm discussing here partially interest me because of their ubiquity, not just in terms of reach, but in terms of subject. You can find memes like this and of similar styles mocking people all across the political spectrum, of all kinds of subcultures and irrespective of gender. I believe firmly in the idea that the insults someone uses tell you a lot more about them than they do about you. Take for instance the weird obsession white nationalists have with calling everyone cucks. But it seems like everyone online is making and sharing these about each other. The same people in that Facebook group arguing against this meme shared this one, and later this. In a similar vein, I'm constantly seeing memes like this for a stunning variety of subjects. There's something there. The literally me's, the soy Wojak, the pink hair girl Wojak, and all sorts of iterations of boomers, coomers, and consumers, and to a more complicated extent, the virgin Chad dichotomy and its iterations, create a kind of character, an archetype based on a type of person, usually a type that can be found online, and reduce them to a sardonic set of recognizable traits, complete with a usually unflattering visual. So that's what I'm going to focus on. This weird genre of memes we've all apparently decided are one of the best ways to own each other. And if my self-conscious response is any indication, that might be accurate. This is going to be a bit of a weird one. There's not much to cite about memes that's from anyone with much more qualification to talk about them than me, so I'm going to cite sources where I can. And those will appear in the upper left corner as usual, with a number corresponding to the citation in the description. But otherwise, I'm kind of on my own here, so I'm looking forward to your thoughts in the comments. Additionally, instead of my normal tendency of putting a big wall of text in the middle of the screen anytime I want to make an aside, I'm going to try something a little different for this video, where I'm going to have letters pop up in the upper left-hand corner, which will correspond to footnotes in the description. So check those out if you have any interest. I think I do some of my best thinking in asides like that, so I don't know, could be cool, could be worth checking out. Part 1. Wojaks, an incomplete overview. Oh, sorry, that sounded be fun later. So just for the record, I'm a big fan of this type of meme, especially ones like this. I love seeing people who are very self-serious or condescending or just awful distilled down to their worst traits, because it feels like a kind of demystifying moment, taking them down a peg, shedding all of the things they present about themselves and revealing a kind of truth. Annoying vote shamers are shown to be deluded and impotent. Military recruiters are exposed as predatory. There's something satisfying about remembering that all those people ready to blame all the ills of the world on people with less faith in the system than they have are basically just trying to cope with their own inability to change anything. The literally me format is pretty much entirely based on this kind of schism between presentation versus reality. The point of the joke is to laugh at the discrepancy between how someone sees themselves and how they're typically seen by others, and the underwhelming or outright sad reality. If you know someone you really don't like who's really into Tyler Durden or the Joker and fancies himself a bit of an edgy boy, there's a kind of schadenfreude at the idea of imagining them identifying with those characters when in reality they're nothing like them outside of a vague societal angst. But that's kind of the thing. Looking at these memes, I'm just imagining someone I don't like doing or saying something that I would find funny. I don't know if people who really like Tyler Durden actually think they could be him. I mean, I guess some do, but they're probably teenagers or well-adjusted in some way. I can't say I've had the pleasure of knowing any personally. The people I do know who were into these characters didn't literally believe they were like them, they just had an abstract affinity for something about them, which I feel like literally everyone has about some character at some point. So if they're not targeting a real phenomenon in this sense, what are they targeting? And that seems to vary. The Tyler Durden fanboy is about a dude who thinks he's edgy or tough or whatever and is really just a basement-dwelling NEET. Ones like the goth girl one, or honestly a lot of the ones about women, seem to have a lot more of an aesthetic connotation. In other words, these characters that you think you look like are hot and you're not. Incels are so catty, I swear to God. My sense of this is that it's less about teasing someone for identifying with a character in and of itself, and more about making a clear attempt to embody something those characters represent, that is, strength, intelligence, individuality, a certain je ne sais quoi that makes them stick in your head, and the failure to do so. It's a ridicule of inauthenticity, of being a cheap knockoff, and the failure to have self-awareness. This one kind of gets at what I'm saying. In the minds of many people, especially internet users, there's this understanding that it's sad or pathetic to see yourself as better or more significant in some way than you actually are, and it's virtuous to acknowledge and embrace your own mundaneness. I think this ties into the angst a lot of people on the internet, especially 4chaners and Redditors, have toward behavior they consider attention-seeking. As I touched on previously, the various iterations of this kind of Wojak have a similar quality in their representations in looking at a type of person in an unflattering light. While there's less of an outright expectations versus reality style comparison happening, the idea behind them seems to be, this type of person annoys me, here's why they're worthy of ridicule. But there is something similar in that the jokes come from a perspective that emphasizes the worst interpretation of a given person. I think this comes through in particular with the ones targeting women. These tend to come from the perspective of men who have given up on relationships or have generally been unsuccessful with them. In that world, women are basically always narcissistic, manipulative, anxious or depressed, and less attractive than they think they are. Even the trad wife, the only vaguely positively represented female Wojak, at least by fashy internet standards, don't escape being reinterpreted in a more cynical way. This is a recurring phenomenon in many memes where one usually positive representation will be subverted in another format, to expose the truth, in a sense. As another example, the doomer girl Wojak was quickly seized upon as a figure of positive self-identification by alt-internet girls since she was a more attractive character and generally portrayed as more likable as well, and this did not pass without comment. There ends up being a cycle where any iteration that pulls away from this negative model will be eventually subsumed into it. I feel like I need to mention here the more recent developments of the large range of Wojaks of color suddenly seeing widespread use, especially since this process started almost as soon as they gained some popularity. As this hilariously stupid article points out, the early examples of these memes pretty much exclusively mobilized them to illustrate racism, portraying the new characters as woke, intelligent, and morally and philosophically correct. But almost as quickly they were being used in pretty blatantly racist ways. This development, while shitty, seems pretty inevitable to me given the general trajectory of these for none of them to end up in a positive light. The momentum on the internet toward detached irony basically means that if something gains popularity, it'll be scrutinized and lambasted. And at this point, I kinda have to stop and think, though I genuinely think many of these are funny, they're also kinda miserable to look at, right? Especially all at once. What kind of person with what kind of worldview thinks in these terms? Constantly seeing the worst in everyone, trying to expose how delusional they are for finding anything good about themselves. It makes sense when the person is clearly objectionable, which is subjective, but most of the people I see represented are at worst a bit annoying, or honestly just sad. In this worldview, everyone is just a deluded victim of their own need to see something hopeful or happy in their lives, or for doing anything other than being an irony-poisoned anonymous person online. I don't want to mince words. This is the mindset of a depressed, angry person. Not shocking given the current state of the world and how many people have virtually no prospects, which these memes probably owe a lot of their popularity to, but this energy doesn't necessarily need to be directed in this way.
Part 2.
I suspect these memes have a kind of intended effect on the people who are being represented. That is, of course, assuming those people recognize themselves as the target. I also suspect that my own reaction is not completely abnormal. I've described this reaction as, is this how people see me, but what do I mean by that? Well, I think fundamentally it comes down to the same anxiety a lot of people talk about online, that everyone you've ever known has an incomplete picture of you in their mind. And often that picture can be influenced by how they categorize you, and that influences how they treat you and talk about you to others. While each of us can pretty easily understand why we do or say something, other people kinda have to make varying degrees of educated guesses, and that's assuming they even decide to use their time and energy to do that. It's like how when we cut someone off in traffic, we're able to say to ourselves, I'm in a hurry, I'm tired, I don't normally do that. But when someone else does it to us, we say, wow, what a dick, where did they learn to drive? You have to make an active choice to think about what the other person's mindset might be and offer possible explanations for their behavior. And most people just don't, because in most isolated instances, it doesn't really matter all that much. Likewise, when we move through the world interacting with friends or just seeing people on social media, we form assumptions about them. We group them together with other people we deem similar in some way relevant to us, and that's basically what these memes reflect. They get popular when a large number of people agree that whatever type of person being represented is real. While it's common for people to establish some group identities they choose, oftentimes we don't appreciate being labeled by others, obviously especially so when those labels are negative. But even positive categorization can feel inaccurate or uncomfortable. I think what's going on when I see these memes is I'm forced to become aware of the categorization people around me are constantly doing, and occasionally to ask if they include me in a category, with all the scrutiny and judgment that implies. Take this chart for example. Reading through these, you can kind of tell most of these people only exist in the minds of depressed online men who only see women through the distorted window of social media. And even for the ones that are less clearly rooted in a hardened, angrily misogynistic framework, something just seems kind of off. But what's happening here is an attempt on the part of the maker to put themselves in the shoes of these various types of women to establish a kind of profile on them. And for a decent number of depressed, terminally online incels, this is the lens through which they look at women. And they can and probably do assign every woman they meet to one of these categories. I'm pretty sure I'd be the blocker. It's kind of akin to empathy if instead of leading to compassion, it led to resentment. Let's look at the blocker as an example here. I was kind of guessing, but I said that one is me because I think some men on my social media probably would think that. Like a lot of women, I get occasional messages and friend requests from men I don't know. Depending on my mood, I'll usually either reply or accept if I have a few mutual friends with them, and if they message me, I'll have a brief conversation out of a sense of politeness. And then eventually things will either peter off or they'll ask me on a date that I'll turn down. From my perspective, everything I'm doing basically makes sense. Maybe it's my weak boundary setting that's causing me to reply to these messages when someone who's more assertive or more defensive of their time spent on this earth would just ignore or block these people, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. From the men's perspectives though, they message someone who turned them down for no particular reason after a polite conversation. And if they're particularly bitter, I could definitely see someone thinking of me in these terms. That I'm self-sabotaging by not going on a date with them, that I'm afraid to let myself love or something. And that makes me feel a little weird, that someone's opinion of me is being shaped in this bizarre, pitying, self-serving way. But it's happening to all of us all the time to varying degrees of accuracy and charitability. I see this aspect in basically all of these memes, this thing approaching empathy that isn't compassionate. It's like someone started to develop a theory of mind and just stopped at the stage that gave them the ability to diss people through questionable psychoanalysis. And I think this is basically what a depressed, alienated brain does with theory of mind. Rather than seek understanding of others to be compassionate, that understanding is used contemptuously, to see everyone in the worst light and bring them down to the same shitty level. I guess what I'm getting at is, what would happen if that energy was directed toward actually understanding people in a useful way? What if instead of reducing people to the worst interpretation of their behavior or accounting for all the ways they're not measuring up, we ask sincerely, and with compassion, why a person might be the way they are? Maybe it won't always be right, since sometimes people are just assholes, but neither is assuming the worst of everyone automatically. And I personally think assuming the best leads us to act better ourselves. I mean, if you're gonna go around assuming women are just miserable all the time, at least make that a reason to be sympathetic. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these memes per se. Again, I like them. I think they're funny. I think you could even potentially argue that they could have a positive effect. Self-awareness can be a pretty hard thing to come by in some people, and if they're being a jerk, sometimes the horror of realizing how other people really see them is a good motivation to become a better person. But I also think there are plenty of people who have more than enough tough talk of this kind directed at them. I'm speaking anecdotally, but looking at memes to research this topic, I couldn't help but notice how disproportionate numbers of these types of memes were being made about transgender people, and how often those were the most heart-wrenching because of how cruel they could be. When a person makes a meme like this, they aren't necessarily representing a fundamental truth about their subject. It can only ever really be the perspective of the maker, necessarily informed by how they see the world. And that worldview can be inaccurate, it can be a misinterpretation, it can be biased or bigoted, it can overemphasize something small to the exclusion of things that have a greater effect in the world because it feels relevant to how they see things. Think about how in the mind of an incel, the most relevant thing when they think about women is sexuality, because that's where their anxieties and grievances are centered on. But in reality, any account of women that begins and ends with sexuality is necessarily an incomplete one, and a misogynist one at that. I see this kind of thing even with ones I agree with. Looking back at that Vooter Wojak, I agree in general with the criticism being made, but it's just one perspective. It's not even the only true one. These people getting lumped in as Vooters, I think, are justified in encouraging others to vote. This kind of person is correct that if more people considered it a duty in the way they do, we could probably get more done. I think this stance ignores the important factors of why people don't think that way, but it's not objectively incorrect to think this. And a person could understand the weaknesses of electoralism as a strategy and still choose to pursue it for other reasons. My point is, I think these memes are interesting. I want them to keep existing. But I'd also like some evolution. The more time you spend online, the more you see how memes can kind of grow and build on themselves. I mean, I think this particular meme's evolution was literally an example of dialectics. I'm already starting to see some reactive trends in these memes. This one and this one act in a subversive way to a few of them already, and I suspect there will be more to come. If I have anything resembling a desired change in this mostly analysis-focused video, it would be that some of that subversion will shed light on the shortcomings of the perspectives that these memes come from. In the meantime, I decided that most of those female Wojaks displayed a stunning ignorance of the actual dumb shit women are doing, so I took the liberty of making a few of my own, in the name of empathy or whatever.
Did that end too abruptly? I feel like it was a strong choice, but maybe a weird one. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear any thoughts in the comments. If you like this video, consider doing the YouTube engagement things, or share this one if you feel so inclined. You can follow me on Twitter at @OrdSnowflake, where you can harass me to stop procrastinating on videos.
Memes. I'm a
Okay,
memer.
bye.
I do memes. We're memeing right now. It's great. I love it. Okay.